Hello and welcome to the module presentation for Signum University for our new program called Working for Vets, which we hope will launch in the fall of 2020. And my name is Robbie Park and I'm the volunteer program coordinator for Signum University. So just to give you a brief overview of Signum's history, we are a state certified, fully accredited online university. And right now we're looking at expanding into adult education programming to serve at-risk populations. And at this time, we are looking at starting off with the homeless veteran population in particular and the crises that they face, and providing support to them to overcome the various issues that they do face using dynamic and relevant content through online e-modules. But there are some issues that we need to talk about in order to overcome these issues when we are dealing with homeless veterans. So the first set of problems that we're going to discuss that need to be solved is the first one is social reintegration. So a lot of homeless veterans do struggle with reintegrating back into society, of course, number one, because they are homeless, but secondly, having a veteran come back from enlistment, a lot of times they tend to struggle anyway with talking to civilians, and it's almost like speaking a different language between military and civilian. Secondly, we also have dignity and self-worth. A lot of veterans tend to struggle with, homeless veterans tend to struggle with their sense of dignity and self-worth because they really struggle to find any sense of meaning or dignity in life despite the sacrifices they've made for this country. And this often leads to feelings of worthlessness and can ultimately lead to depression and suicide. Lastly, the two problems that are interrelated insofar as employment goes is digital fluency. A lot of homeless persons do struggle in general because with being digitally fluent because they have basically no contact with the internet, with computers, with any kind of smart technology. And in some cases, they may not have had contact with that technology in quite a long time. And this is a huge barrier when we talk about the last problem, which is employment. Many job applications are online today. It can be really difficult to even apply for a job in general if you have no email address, if you haven't had any experience with typing or creating a portfolio, anything like that. So these are sort of the four problems that we are looking to solve. And so our objective is to provide essential services to homeless veterans to ensure social reintegration with a focus on digital fluency and hopefully to use that fluency to secure stable employment. And how we hope to do this is by providing self-paced e-modules that address social reintegration, e-portfolios, and digital fluency. And these modules will operate in rotating 4-hour blocks throughout the month in collaboration with area homeless shelters for student recruitment, which we'll talk more about here in just a minute. So let's look at the model and concept. So of course, the first thing that I mentioned was digital fluency. Most jobs today no longer just require Microsoft Office. So it's not enough for you to be able to type. You really need to be able to do much more. And you have to learn new tools very quickly and achieve a high level of digital fluency very, very quickly. We use Google Classroom, and so we also try to use mostly free online resources for our students. So one of the first skills we want them to learn are audio and video recording, and we use GoToMeeting, Screencast-O-Matic, and Flipgrid for that. So students would be watching videos and recording themselves for interview skill building. Secondly, of course, composition media. So this would be more than just Google Docs. We would also be using things like Blogger and eBlog. And we want students to achieve a level of writing mastery using these tools, but also we want them to keep a blog to document their journey through the program. And then lastly, we also have the employment e-profile. And so this is where we talk about things like LinkedIn. Like it's very standard nowadays for everyone to have a LinkedIn profile for professional purposes. And we also want students to develop relevant materials in this portfolio in addition to a LinkedIn profile. And we'll talk more about what those materials mean in a second. So when we're looking at the module delivery method, like how are we going to create this content and with what in mind? We have 3 points. The first one is we want content with confidence. We want students to re-enter the employment field, absolutely, but we also want them to rediscover some self-confidence and dignity with this new phase in their life, and that's going to be something covered in the content. Secondly, we also want it to be scaffolded, so this is not a case of just jumping in at any module. These modules are going to be scaffolded, and I'll show you what that means in just a moment. And then last, we do want it to be relevant. We don't want students to just make content that has no meaning or purpose for them. We want it to be tied to something, and in this case, probably employment, whether that is a resume, a cover letter, or even their LinkedIn profile. So this is just a sample outline of this, when we say scaffolded learning at your own pace, sort of what this means. So in Module 1, for example, on the left, we have the introduction and foundation. So this is also where you would have an assessment test to see where students are at digitally. So if perhaps they've only been homeless for 6 months, maybe they've had more experience and exposure to the internet versus someone who's been homeless for 10 years. We'll also be talking about housing resources and stability and working with our area partners on that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have Module 5, which would be the mastery workshop. So at this point, what we hope through a scaffolded learning and a self-paced learning, that by the time students reach Module 5, that they have hit a certain level of mastery, they've built a LinkedIn profile, they have a full e-portfolio, and they may eventually go on to become technology mentors to enrollees who are in modules 1 through 3. And just as a note, all modules are assisted by a module preceptor or teacher to ensure that the content and assignments are reviewed and that the students are prepared to move on to the next module. And Signum's current policy is that classes really need to run in a 1:15 ratio. So we'd probably start off with just almost like a cohort of 15 students at the beginning in order to ensure that they are successful. So talking about logistics, so how are we going to pull this off? The first piece we need to talk about, of course, is budgeting. So there's a number of ways that we can budget for this program. So one of the things that we have to do is foster community connections with local shelters. And this is also how we can recruit students, is through these shelters. Especially if they have barriers in terms of things like having computers or phones, things like that. And that's something we'll talk about in a second. And then, of course, we'll be applying for federal and state assistance in the form of grants. So community partnerships actually are extremely important because they can provide what we call donations in kind. So that doesn't necessarily mean monetary assistance. It can mean that, but it can also mean other things as well. And I'll give you some examples here in just a moment. But then also we will be applying for federal and state assistance. So at this time, about $4.9 billion is distributed as grant money for veteran assistance from the VA each year. And that does include funding to start new programs. And through the state, which in this case, I live in Missouri, and that's where the pilot program will be run. In the state of Missouri, the Adult Education and Literacy Program is how you can apply for grant money through that. And the community partners are absolutely a very important piece of this. So community partners, so in the example of Kansas City, a company such as Sprint could donate laptops and cell phones. They could also donate a Wi-Fi hotspot for a stable internet connection. Having access to the internet, having access to email, and a stable phone number are extremely key in getting hired. Second, also classroom spaces. We are looking for spaces where students can go for more than just 1 hour at a time, because most libraries do have a limited amount. In some libraries around Kansas City, you can only be logged in for 30 minutes. That's not enough time to apply for a job, and so that's why we'll be looking for that extra space. And then lastly, also just the community connections in general may find that as they are partners with us, they may be interested in hiring some of our graduates, and they may spread the word about this program. And so all three of these things are what we would definitely call like donations in kind. They don't have to be monetary. They certainly can be, but they can contribute in a wide variety of other ways. Lastly, in terms of the program assessment, this is another thing. How do we determine that this program has been successful? For the purposes of this program, we're looking at a 45-day minimum in terms of how many days they need to maintain stable housing before they can consider exiting the program. So we want them to be in a stable housing environment for at least 45 days. Lastly, secondly, we also have stable employment. So we would prefer for them to be stably employed for at least 2 months. If they can get enough paychecks to the point where they can have a deposit, they can be in stable housing. Usually stable housing and stable employment do correlate with each other, and so we really need to have both secured before we can consider them truly graduated from the program. And then lastly, to help create a sense of social belonging and sort of another culture that would be developing that they would feel a part of, we have a mentorship program that we hope that the students will want to come back and assist new students as they join the program. And this kind of creates a new sense of community and purpose. And there's a number of reasons for why we would do this, because really, what is the return on investment here? And what we hope is that in Kansas City, we will continue to develop more supportive communities, a broader and more inclusive network of support for everyone that lives here. Secondly, also inclusive programming. As I stated at the beginning, this is initially for vets, but we'd really like to open this program up for all homeless persons and focus on all of these different at-risk populations, including women and children, which are the fastest growing demographic of homeless persons. And then lastly, permanent change. We really want students to truly feel confident that they have finished this program. We don't just want to discharge them whenever we think that they're done. So for example, even though the program may take 6 to 8 weeks to complete, veterans can retake the modules as often as they want until they feel secure. So let's say they go through module 3 and they feel like, I would really like to retake that module again. They absolutely can do that until they feel secure about themselves and they feel that sense of dignity and self-worth and purpose. And that ensures that they really are prepared for the job market and not that they're just being released into it. If you do have any questions about myself, as I said, my name is Robbie Park, and I have a long history of working in higher ed and in programming and also with online coursework. And you can certainly contact me at roberta.park@signumu.org if you have any questions. And I would like to thank you all very much for your time.